webinar for 2015 strategy. We're going to get started here in about roughly 10 minutes, so feel free to stay on the line and we'll begin shortly. If you have any questions in the interim, please feel free to reach out using the chat function through GoToWebinar, or you can also reach out using the hashtag CPC Webinar on Twitter.
Hey, Mary, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're live too.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to today's webinar with CPC Strategy, talking about PPC Strategy for 2015. We're joined today by our resident PPC expert, Louis Brannon, and he'll be talking to you about how to sell more on search and how to use lessons and strategy from 2014 for your paid search campaigns to inform strategy moving into 2015. Alrighty, a little bit about CPC Strategy before we begin, just so you are familiar with who we are and why we are experts in the retail search and paid search field. So CPC Strategy is a digital marketing agency with a heavy focus on retail search. What that means is we understand how retail search works, and we harness that for online sellers on major sales channels, and those include Google, Amazon, and Bing. We help online retailers leverage and optimize their search presence to get more clicks, conversions, and exposure on search. More importantly, we just help you put relevant information, your products, in front of those customers who are bottom of the funnel and ready to buy. A little bit about logistics for the webinar. As with all of our webinars, we will be recording this webinar, so stay tuned for that webinar recording. And you'll receive that in your email later this week. Throughout the presentation, feel free to reach out with any questions using the chat box in GoToWebinar. Feel free to also reach out to us using the hashtag CPC Webinar on Twitter. And in addition to that, if you have any organizational questions or you think of something later on down the road, feel free to reach out to me personally. My name is Mary. I'll be driving the webinar. And if you just have any e-commerce or PPC questions at a later date, also feel free to reach out to me. And my email is mary@cpcstrategy.com. Alrighty, so our amazing presenter today is Lou. I've worked with Lou for quite some time, and he is an extraordinary knowledge source for PPC, page search, SEM. He's been a PPC analyst for some time, has an extensive amount of SEM experience, and best of all, he's got this beautiful, sonorous, deep baritone voice, so you'll be quite happy to listen to him talk about PPC and search best practices. Alrighty, and so with that, I'm just going to pass it off to Lou, and he'll get you guys started on some PPC best practices for 2015.
Hey everyone out there, thank you Mary, I appreciate that. That introduction to my voice. I hope that everyone doesn't leave disappointed with that type of intro. So everyone, nice to be here with you today. Again, my name is Louis. I am a paid search analyst here at CPC Strategy, and again, like Mary said, we focus on retail search. So hopefully all you guys listening that are looking to learn some tips on evaluating your performance last year or this year heading into next year, you'll get some really good information out of this, and it'll be able to help you inform your strategy moving into 2015. So with that, I'll kind of go over on this slide here what we're going to talk about mainly today are these topics. So the first thing that we're going to go into is talking about how to take stock of your 2014 performance, specifically through AdWords. And then we're going to talk about that as it relates to understanding the landscape in which your ads live in. And then also we're going to talk about, once we get that information, how to kind of plan and formulate a plan for 2015, and then what kind of main things we want to focus on for the PPC plan going into 2015. And then lastly, we'll go over just some best practices that are always good at any time of the year to help you get the most out of your campaigns for more revenue and more profit. So the first things first is anytime we talk about evaluating your performance heading into the new year, you want to take stock of what happened in 2014. I know this slide says Q4, but really this relates to all of 2014, the whole year. Q4, obviously, for most retailers is the big quarter, the big shopping quarter, obviously with the holidays. So that's one that we want to definitely focus on, but this really applies to all years' performance. So the first thing to talk about is were your broad objectives met? Before you start with any type of analysis, you really want to understand your evaluation in relation to your goals. So, you can't really paint with a broad brush, obviously. So the first thing we want to figure out is, what was our broad objective? Were we focused on growing orders, where perhaps we are a new company that's trying to gain market share and we really wanted to get in there and get new customers and grow order volume? Or are we a longer standing type of an account that maybe has gotten cost out of control a little bit and we wanted to gain efficiency? So those are the two kind of broad categories that you might fall into. So you really want to evaluate based on those two things. Again, there's not one recipe for evaluating this, and specifically particular campaigns. You don't want to evaluate a search campaign the same as you would a display campaign or the same as you would a local campaign. So that's another thing to consider. You know, your search campaigns are going to be evaluated a little bit more based on direct response and order volume and ROI, whereas your display campaigns are very different. They're going to be evaluated based on interaction rates with your ads, perhaps traffic driven to your site, and things like that. Whereas a local campaign, of course, is more focused on driving foot traffic, particularly to a specific brick and mortar. So that is a little bit of nuance that you want to keep in mind when you're evaluating these campaigns. So a main focus of this webinar is going to be the landscape, the ad landscape, the AdWords ecosystem, so to speak. So as you know, that being a main theme, we want to consider everything that we talk about in terms of the landscape. So one of the major indicators of the landscape are these competitive metrics that AdWords gives us, and they're often overlooked. So that's one of the main things that we're going to talk about today, particularly impression share. So you can see here, impression share is akin to basically your piece of the pie. So you can think of it like a big pie, and you and your competitors are all trying to get a slice of that pie. So your impression share is going to be, you know, that your piece of that pie. How big or how small is it? And another point here is that we're going to talk about keeping an eye on impression share, specifically your lost impression share. And we'll go into this more, but you can see here in the screenshot, this screenshot here shows how to access these competitive metrics in AdWords, and these are going to be a theme of what we talk about. But here, when you customize your columns in AdWords, when you're looking at a campaign view or an ad group view or even a keyword view, you can add these competitive metrics here, and all of these are listed out here. And I'll give you a little bit of a better definition of each one. Of course, your impression share is just the impressions that you've received on the search network divided by the estimated number of impressions that you were eligible to receive. And then exact match impression share is just the same thing, but only for your exact match keywords. And then this is a big one here, your lost impression share due to rank. This is the percentage of impression share. This is, the percentage of time that your ads weren't shown on the search network due to your poor ad rank. So this is a big metric that we're going to talk about and that you should keep an eye on. This and also search lost impression share due to budget. These are two metrics that can show you how much impression share you're losing, either because your rank is not good or you're not, your budget is insufficient. And then these other metrics relate more to display campaigns. They're basically the same type of things, but just for the display network. And then relative CTR is another metric that is interesting. We won't go too much into that. So all of this that we just mentioned is a part of a broader theme, which is the auction intelligence. Many times when we're evaluating AdWords campaigns, we're really just looking at the black and white, and we're looking at, hey, we got this many clicks, we got this many orders, we spent this much, here's our ROAS. That's not always the best way to look at it. And like I said, a major theme here is being intelligent with your auction analysis. And it's really a tool to be able to view and get insight into the competitive landscape. So not only are we going to talk about those competitive metrics that I just mentioned, but also auction insights is a specific level of reporting in AdWords that can really give you some interesting and neat views into the competitive landscape. And you can get as granular as you need to. Some people just want to evaluate this at the campaign level, but we definitely recommend not only doing that, but you can also see these auction insights reports at the ad group level or the keyword level. And this screenshot here that I've included is showing you when you're looking at, this is an actual ad group view here, and this is how you can access this report. Right next to the edit button, there's this little details button here, and this is going to bring up the auction insights. So if you enable that, this is going to give you a report on each one of these ad groups, and it's going to go through some of these auction insights statistics here. So what does the auction insights report look like, and what does it really tell you? So here you'll see a screenshot of an auction insights report that I just pulled from an ad group view. And so for this particular ad group that I'm looking at here, you can see here what your impression share is, and then what the impression share is for some of your competitors. And you can also see these other things called overlap rate and outranking share. So let me talk about those a little bit. Of course, we know impression share here. We've already gone over that. That's the impressions that you got divided by the total number of impressions that you were eligible for. But what are these two guys over here, overlap rate and outranking share? Again, often overlooked metrics, but we're going to talk a little bit about what they mean. So the overlap rate, that is how often a competitor's ad received an impression when your ad also received an impression. So in relation to this screenshot here, we can see that Macy's here, they have an overlap rate of 20.7%. That means that the competitor received an impression 20% of the time when our ad also received an impression. That's really interesting information to know kind of how you stand against your competitors for that particular ad group. The outranking share is another great metric. That one is the number of times that your ad ranked higher than another participant's ad, plus the number of times your ad showed when theirs did not, divided by the total number of auctions that you participated in. And I know that's a lot of stuff to take in there, but essentially it just means that if the number of times that you outranked another participant or another competitor divided by the total number of auctions. And this is really interesting to look at because you can immediately see, hey, okay, 18% of the time I'm outranking Macy's for this ad group. 19% of the time I'm outranking Kohl's. And this is really good directional information when you're trying to determine, what types of budget and bid type of adjustments you need to make for that particular campaign. Okay, so now that we have all that information and we know that the competitive landscape is really important, I want you guys to kind of tie that back and think about this. Remember, we're talking about how to evaluate 2014. And the reason that we want to focus on these competitive types of metrics before we get into some of the more basic types of reporting is that needs to be a consideration when you're doing your reports. When you're looking at basic campaign and ad group level reports, you want to make sure that before you start evaluating your ROI and what type of budget adjustments to make, you really want to make sure you have a firm understanding of those competitive metrics, know that they exist, lean on them to understand your piece of the pie, your place in the ecosystem, and that will really give you a different perspective as you start to look at these reports and determine which campaigns and ad groups were winners or losers in 2014. So with that said, what are some of the key reports within AdWords to pull and look at to evaluate your performance this year, moving into next year? Of course, the first point that I point out here is the basic campaign reporting. Always you want to just download a campaign report, look at all your campaigns, look for budgetary low-hanging fruit, meaning there's going to be probably some campaigns that are obvious losers, and you also want to consider budget adjustments on those campaigns. More often than not, we see campaigns that have been running for quite a long time that are just eating up a lot of budget, whereas that budget could be going into better performance campaigns. So you definitely want to download those basic campaign reports and look for that low-hanging fruit. Another big thing for a yearly performance report is ad creative. Again, often overlooked, but it's crazy how many times we see ad creative that's running within an ad group or a campaign that has been running for a long, long time, and it's been cutting into impressions for another ad within the ad group that's performing much better. So you definitely want to evaluate all your ad creatives at the ad group level and figure out if you have certain creatives that are not performing as well as others, and go ahead and clear those out, pause them, and move towards your better performing variation, and even spin off a new variation of that top performer moving into 2015. Next, keywords. You want to find your hero keywords and your zero keywords. And that is to say that you're going to need to evaluate 2014 in order to be able to put your best foot forward in 2015. And one of the big ways to do that is just to identify which keywords were really your main, your main top keywords that stood out, that drove the most order volume for you. We manage a lot, oftentimes multi-million-dollar accounts, and one of the things that we see is a very small percentage of that spend is actually around, a very large percentage of that spend is around a very small group of keywords, even in multi-million-dollar accounts. So the key there is to identify what are those big top spend keywords, which ones were your heroes within that subset, and then you want to find those that just aren't doing anything for you. Which ones of your keywords are just candidates to be scratched out completely? Pause them, delete them. They're not doing anything for you. So the next thing is, the end of the season after Christmas is over, and that little week or two period between the start of Q1 and after Christmas. For the most part, that's going to be a time of the year when you can kind of reset your strategy heading into the new year. And it is definitely the season for query harvesting. And that means search term reporting, search term scraping. And the way that you do that is you simply perform search query reports, and you want to find those certain search queries that can be turned into positive keyword targets, and also which search queries are populating your ads that are driving up your impressions. They're not bringing orders for you, and they're really hurting your quality score. Those are going to be great candidates for negative keywords. So absolutely want to do some query harvesting at this time of the year. So with all of this said, now we've talked about kind of evaluating the competitive landscape, where you stand. We've talked about some of the basic reports that you can pull down and get ready for 2015. But what are some of the other insights that we can look for from 2014 that we can use to lead into our 2015 strategy? One of the main ones, especially in terms of preparing your budget for 2015, is understand what type of seasonality swings happen in 2014 that can give you a leg up and a better plan for how to set your budget projections for 2015. So specifically, which brands and categories, and I say brands and categories because, again, we focus mainly on retail here, but really this could relate to any ad group or cluster of keywords. Which elements of your campaigns really gained momentum or lost momentum in 2014, and what times of the year did that happen? And this is not only, this information can not only be found within AdWords, but also from within whatever analytics software you use on a site-wide level. You should be able to see on a seasonal or quarter-to-quarter basis kind of were there brands or particular items or product groups that started standing out above others at given times of the year. And then we want to look at that information and determine where our budget's in line for that. For example, maybe an online retailer that sells shoes noticed that from Q2 to Q3, a lot of the leather boots really started to pick up. But we want to look at our AdWords campaign in which those keywords live in, and we want to see this really started to pick up site-wide, but did our budget change? Was our budget in line with that shift in traffic? And if it wasn't, then you can automatically see that heading into 2015, you need to have that projected for that shift for that particular brand. And then going back, let's tie that back to the competitive metrics. When I say, do you have room to grow for a particular campaign or a particular brand or product type, you want to evaluate that based on the competitive metrics and the auction insights. If you are only getting 10, 15, 20% impression share, but your campaign has really good return metrics, and you can see on the site-wide level that you had a traffic uptick there and the order volume increase, then you really would have a holistic view of whether or not you want to increase budget. In that scenario, you would want to increase budget. But if your auction insights reports and your competitive metrics are telling you that you were already growing impression share during that time, you weren't losing out on a lot of impression share due to budget, then you'll know that you're in a pretty good position for budget, and you won't have to take much action there. So those are definitely things to consider. The next thing that we're going to talk about is another really important part of search engine marketing, and it's one that a lot of people talk about, but it's really hard to keep a grasp on and really be agile in your management of this, but it's ad schedules. You want to learn from 2014 which times of the day and which days of the week and even which quarters and which weeks performed better than others. We can do that by looking at an ad schedule analysis report, and you can look at that on a quarter-over-quarter basis in terms of what changed from quarter to quarter, what changed year over year from the previous year, from 2013, And really there's just a lot of insight to get from detailed reporting on ad schedules that you can use to at least start off the year with a smart ad schedule. And one of the ways to do that is to look at the schedule details reporting. I didn't include a screenshot here, but when you're looking at your ad schedules within AdWords, there's a little button that you can click on that says Schedule Details, and that's going to give you a really comprehensive view of every day of the week plus hour of day of your performance, and that's where you can download that data into an Excel document, to a spreadsheet, and you can really start to pivot that data and look at which times of the day and days of the week were standout performers and which ones weren't. And then you can evaluate that data. You can even segment that data by quarter, and you can look at how that changed, quarter over quarter. Maybe Mondays from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. were really great in quarter 2, but quarter 3, that time slot just fell off. And why could that be? It really depends on your business, but maybe you sell something like textbooks, and of course, those types of time slots when students are in class might change as opposed to when they're in the summer semester. And that's when you really want to get granular with that type of segmentation and data. And it all depends on your business, of course, but in a general sense, schedule and ad schedule details reporting is going to be important for you. And again, this is just reiterating on that the month over month or the quarter over quarter analysis can be really enlightening. A lot of times what happens is that an ad schedule gets implemented based on some data analysis that you do, and you notate, okay, I started this new ad schedule on this day, and then you might go back 2 or 3 months later and evaluate how it did, but you're only evaluating that based on the time when you started compared to now, and what was that compared to the previous period. But really you want to look at it from a quarter over quarter standpoint, especially in retail, as the quarterly trends can change so much, and obviously you want to incorporate your type of business into the strategy there and understand your specific business needs. All right, so we've talked about a lot of stuff here, and I hope I'm not talking too fast for you guys, but there's kind of a lot to go over, but this is going to kind of slow it down a little bit and go back to a little bit of basics. We want to talk about some just basic house cleaning things that you can do within your PPC accounts that will get you in a better position to clean some things up, reset a few things here and there, make sure that you are in the best spot in terms of settings and stuff like that heading into the new year. So the first point I've mentioned here is to scrub your account settings. And what that means is just to go through your settings in terms of your mobile bid adjustment, how's mobile performing, your ad delivery settings. Right now you might be set to deliver your ads on an accelerated basis, and maybe you're noticing you can marry that data with the fact that you might be maxing out budget early in the days, and you might want to change that setting. Another thing is ad extensions, or excuse me, I'll go back to location reporting. That's a big thing. We could talk a lot more about geographic reporting, but this kind of falls under the house cleaning section here, and most everyone out there probably understands that reporting on geographic performance is big. So this is just a good time of the year to download those geographic reports and figure out if your bids are in line with your performance there. Ad extension reporting is another great one to look at. Which site links and site link combinations were working better than others? Are people interacting with your call extensions? Do you need to update that? Do you have all of your ad extensions in place? That's a big thing that we see with accounts here. Not utilizing all of the ad extensions that are at your disposal, especially if you're running local campaigns. Are you utilizing your your location extension so that you show up on Google Maps, stuff like that. So scrubbing down your ad extensions is really important. And then network settings is the last thing I mentioned here. And by this I mean, are search partners helping you or hurting you? And this is specifically for search campaigns. For those that aren't familiar, within a search campaign you have an option to only put your ads on the Google search engine, or also you can enable search partners, which is a network of websites that are also search-related websites that Google owns that your ads can also potentially be eligible to show on. A lot of times we see good, solid performance on search partner websites. A lot of times we don't. We see very poor performance. But luckily, Google does give you the option to include or exclude search partners from your campaigns. So you definitely want to check that out and see how your network settings are configured, and is search partner traffic doing well for you? Are they your friend or are they your foe? And then you can make that adjustment on the fly. All right, moving into a little bit more discussion about general analytics, Google Analytics specifically for 2015. Now that the year is coming to an end, you have a little while to get into, doing these things that we just talked about, some reporting, resetting, scrubbing. What is going to be big for 2015? And here I mentioned it's a new era. And I really feel like, and we here at CPC Strategy feel like, Google Analytics is going to be really big for your business in 2015. Google has made an investment in improving their analytics platform for retail. And for those that aren't familiar with universal analytics and enhanced e-commerce for analytics, we definitely recommend that you should get familiar with it and invest in installing it on your website because it's going to be big. And here I've just highlighted a few things about the new Google Analytics e-commerce enhanced platform. And first of all, it is part of Universal Analytics. I'm sure most of you have seen that Google Analytics has been upgraded to the new Universal model that you can install. You can upgrade that there. The enhanced e-commerce portion is accomplished by installing the ec.js plugin. You have to have the Universal Analytics script on your site first, and then you can install this plugin. And of course, it's a lot more complicated than I'm making it seem here, but there's obviously development work involved. But it's obviously something that can be done if you have a capable development team, and needs to be done because it really is going to give you, and that goes into my next point, a lot more insight into how people are engaging with your website. So up until now, we have had really good insight into specific products within the e-commerce tab of Google Analytics, but now we're even going to be able to get specific brand, product category, and product level data, more types of data that we've never gotten before in terms of specific paths that people are taking, specific product sets, how people are interacting with them, and we're going to be able to track those specific groupings of information that are really going to be able to help us. So the next point here is the merchandising success. What that refers to is that the new Google Enhanced for e-commerce analytics is going to give us the ability to see on-site types of promotions like banners and different types of sale items that you have on your site, and we can see how people interact with those and how that leads to shopping cart types of activities, and that can be really insightful. And then product attribution. Product attribution to the point where we can actually see which types of merchandising blocks on the website in terms of banners or even specific product mixes on a category page. You can set those up in configurable blocks, and you can see how they are relating to your goal process, and that's really interesting. And then of course, search funnels is another big thing that's part of this enhanced e-commerce. We're going to be able to see at a product level, at a brand level, at a product group or merchandising block level, what the search funnel is like, where people are clicking, where they are abandoning, which types of funnels are working for us. And that really helps to inform our ad strategy in terms of how we need to be bidding on particular products and brands. And so lastly, I mentioned that you should invest here. This is what I mean by this is that it's not now the time of the year that Q4 is coming to a close, heading into 2015. You should really consider making the investment in upgrading to the enhanced e-commerce, because getting ahead of the curve and being in position to take advantage of this robust offering that Google Analytics is giving us is going to be important, and it's going to be absolutely a good investment for most retailers out there. All right, so one of the last things that we'll talk about here, and we're kind of winding down, but definitely wanted to go over some best practices for 2015, specifically for Google Shopping. Of course, Google Shopping is one of our core competencies here at CPC Strategy. It is a really, really fast-growing channel within the PPC sphere, and absolutely for retail, it is a must in terms of being on that channel and absolutely taking advantage of the best practices and all the optimizations that you can do for Google Shopping, because it's growing at quite a clip, and it's becoming where the majority of people online, on Google anyway, go to do their shopping. So what are some best practices for 2015 for your Google Shopping campaign? The first thing that I mentioned is care about your data quality. This is really important. You guys would be surprised at how many feeds we get, how many data feeds that we get with products that have a lot of misconfigured information, just a lot of sloppy type of data. So you really want to care about the quality of your data and make sure that from your shopping cart, from your back end, you are exporting the best, cleanest data file that you can to export, to send to Google Shopping in order for your products to get the maximum visibility. You want to follow Google's rules that they've laid out for us. There is an official Google taxonomy file that shows you how to categorize your products for Google Shopping. That's often overlooked and not really taken advantage of. You definitely want to follow that. It's one of our core pillars here at CPC Strategy is that we make sure that our data feeds are absolutely built to the T based on Google's rules and their specifications. Character limits is another big thing. Google often changes their rules on character limits and how many characters can show in your title. It can lead to product warnings, product suspensions. A lot of times half your products from your feed might get taken down because of errors with your characters or incorrect characters or character limits. And just being on top of that stuff and following Google's rules can be a great first step to improving your relevancy and your performance on Google Shopping. That goes into the next point. You want to optimize your titles, your Google product categories, and your descriptions of your products to fit within Google specifications. The next thing that I want to talk about, and this is kind of a sports reference, so for all you people that aren't sports fans, I apologize, but you want to set your starting lineup for 2015. And don't be afraid to bench some SKUs. And what I mean by this is that specific items or SKUs within your data feed, we don't always have to send every single product, and we don't always have to bid each one of those products directly, the same. So by set your starting lineup, I mean look at your Google Shopping performance in 2014. Look at your site-wide product level performance. Which items, which products are your starters? Which ones should you be trotting out there above the others? And of course, I'm not talking about just 2 or 3 items here and there, but we definitely want to make sure that we're featuring those top performance items in Google Shopping. And there are ways that you can do that within custom labeling in the feed and stuff like that we don't have time to get into, but that's the kind of things that we do here at CPC Strategy, and we show our clients and allow them to really be able to put those SKUs up front. Okay, and like I said, don't be afraid to bench some. If you're noticing that particular items within Google Shopping are getting a lot of clicks, they're not performing, put them on the bench. Either greatly reduce the bid on them, or take them out of the data feed altogether. And if you have a very large data feed, there are easier ways to do this in the form of labeling within the data feed, and that's something that is definitely recommended to read and learn about. And it's something that we do here, and it's part of our core strategy. And then lastly, segment, segment, segment. And by this I mean you don't just want to look at all of your item IDs, which ones did well and which ones didn't. You don't want to look at just which brands did well and which ones didn't. You really want to get down and segment this data. You want to make sure that you get into each brand, each category, each product type, each segment of your campaign, and analyze which ones did well and which ones didn't. And also segmenting, and this goes back to what we talked about earlier, but segmenting by time and quarter over quarter, month over month, that type of stuff, those types of time segmentations and geographic segmentations, all that goes into a robust Google Shopping analysis. And being able to do all of this in Google Shopping and shape it up is going to really bode well for your Google Shopping campaigns moving into next year. And then these 2 screenshots here that I've included, what these are is an example of Google product categories for a given item or given items. The first one here, you see that this is optimized because we have this Google product category here, and we're breaking it out into its full category. This item is a coat or a jacket, so you can see that the Google product category here is apparel and accessories, clothing, outerwear, coats and jackets. But interestingly, a lot of times what we see from our retailers is that they're just categorizing this item like this over here, where you see not optimized, apparel and accessories, clothing. Of course, it is clothing, but when you start talking about users that click through on the Google Shopping tab and they start looking at and filtering for specific types of products, If you are not optimized over here, your products have a much lower chance of what we call skewing up or appearing on those comparison shopping pages. So you definitely want to make sure that you're optimizing your data there. All right, so just to recap kind of the things that we went over, we talked about how to take stock of your 2014 performance, and specifically in relation to the lay of the land, the ecosystem, you know, the competitive landscape. And then we talked about how to use that for planning for 2015. And then we talked about a few of the best practices in AdWords campaigns, search, display, as well as Google Shopping campaigns. And hopefully you guys, everything that we talked about will give you some initial insights and some initial encouragement to go out and perform some of these reports, and that we think will lead to more profit for you guys, and that's of course the bottom line. So that is everything that we had to go over, so I will turn it back over to Mary here to kind of wrap things up. And yeah, thank you guys for listening. I really enjoyed it, and again, I'm sure Mary will go over this, but if you have any follow-up questions or want to know more, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do our best to get you that information. So thanks again, everyone. Have a happy holidays, and come see us, visit our blog on CPC Strategy, and thank you very much.
All right, we're going to move into our Q&A section. Lou just touched on a really great point, and I want to reiterate that really quickly. Obviously, he truncated a couple of different points, and so for more in-depth strategy on different types of reports, PPC strategy, resources on Google Shopping, we have a ton of great articles over at the CPC Strategy blog, which is at cpcstrategy.com/blog, and then on our .com as well, we have a ton of great resources that cover that same gambit of items as well. Also, again, feel free to reach out using the hashtag CPC webinar to myself personally or to Lou. And I'm just going to start outlining some questions that we have available here. So I have a question from Brent, and he kind of just wants to know specifically where is the detailed reporting that you're talking about. And so I'm assuming he is talking about analytics reports with for PPC.
Okay, so some of the details report that I was talking about, I think that you're probably referring to the ad schedule detailed report. Sorry, one second. Hey, sorry about that, you guys. I had someone step in here. So yeah, specifically for the ad schedules, you want to look at, when you're looking at an ad schedule, you have that section open in AdWords. There's a little button there that says details, and that's where you can click on that, and then you can select from the drop-down menu there. It'll say day or hour of day, and that's where you can click on a couple of those different segments, and you can see the full breadth of all of that information there.
Great, yeah, that's super helpful information. I have a question from Joe in terms of specific keyword strategy. He wants to know, in terms of specific keywords, would you advocate including verbs? Is that sort of a winning strategy?
Including verbs, that's interesting. I think that in general, in general in retail, you want to focus more on the specific product level keywords, or the product type keywords. So that typically won't include verbs, but things like where to buy or best site to buy X product, those would include verbs. So I think that in some cases you would want to include verbs, but it really depends on what type of product or service that you are advertising for. For service-related advertising and lead generation type stuff, I think that verbs would be more important. But in retail, generally, there aren't as many there. So I hope that answered your question.
Fantastic. Very cool. I have a great question here from a fellow who labeled himself rocket scientist. He wants to know, does an auction insight only include a % of the total traffic?
Well, Auction Insights does include, it is a percentage of the total traffic, but it also takes into account your settings. So if you have an ad schedule in place, for example, to greatly reduce your bids for a given hour of the day, then it's only going to consider the total traffic that was available within your current settings. So it's really not the total traffic that was available. It's the total traffic that was available based on the settings that you have set up. Another thing to consider is that I think what you're trying to get at, and it's a good point, is that for the Auction Insights and the competitive metrics in general, you don't always want to go after 100% impression share because, of course, if you're bidding on broader type keywords, there's going to be a lot of impression share available for any given type of search. Let's say, for example, your keyword is hats. Of course, your keyword, if it's a broad keyword, would be eligible to match up your ads based on queries like hat racks, hat stores, you know, different types of hats that maybe you don't sell. So in that case, you don't necessarily want to bid towards a 100% impression share. That's where different match types come into play, where you want to restrict some of those searches based on broad match modified or phrase or exact matches. So I think what you mean, and I hope I answered this, is that when you consider impression share and Auction Insights, it is based on, number one, the total amount of traffic or impressions that are available to you based on your settings, but you don't always want to go for the absolute maximum impression share.
Very cool. I have a query here specific to, you had touched on best practices surrounding ad creative, and I have a question in terms of, do you have any general ad creative tips or a way that you would suggest someone might go about auditing their ad created for their campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of ad tips, you definitely want to include, you know, the ad landscape is kind of so watered down now. A lot of the ads look the same. So you want to get creative with your calls to action, specifically in your headline and your description line 1. Description line 1, if your ad is shown in the top position on the page, description line 1 is going to, more often than not, be appended to your headline, so it's going to show at the very top just like your headline does. And so you want to have a strong headline and a strong description line 1 that really has a compelling message, a really compelling call to action. And then in terms of just best practices, you want to make sure that you're highlighting any types of sales or any types of unique value propositions that you have to offer over your competition. And then the second part of your question was just evaluating. I think it was how do you kind of evaluate ad performance. Again, it goes back to what type of campaign you have. If it's a direct response campaign, one of the main things that you want to look at is conversion rate, because click-through rate doesn't always tell the whole story. You want to look at which ads were clicked on the most, but then also which ones of those ads converted the best, and that relates to how clean is the ad experience from your ad click to your landing page, and that tells you a lot about the relevance of your ad to the landing page. And that's obviously a big component of quality score, is expected click-through rate, number 1, and then also landing page experience. That is what's going to allow you to have cheaper CPCs, get your ads in the better position, and convert them better, is if you make sure that your ad has, number 1, a compelling offer, number 2, creative ad text and ad text that stands out that's going to allow it to get clicked on at a high rate. And then once that clicks into the landing page, is your landing page going to convert and make a sale, and does it relate strongly to your ad copy? And all those things taken together will give you a better chance to succeed. And when evaluating that, that's what you want to look at, which ads converted really well. If it's more of a display-oriented campaign or more of a traffic acquisition type campaign or lead generation campaign, then you want to look at click-through rate, which ads were clicked through at the highest rate. And of course, you want to consider conversion rate as well, but there's a little bit of a slightly nuanced difference when you're comparing those different types of campaigns. But I would say overall, click-through rate and conversion rate are the main ones that you want to take into consideration.
Definitely very helpful. I just wanted to let you guys know that we're coming about 10 minutes on noon right now. We do have a hard deadline just because I know you guys want to get some lunch, and everybody's got a lot of things to do today. So we will only be covering a couple more questions. That being said, we do have a ton of fantastic questions that you guys are asking. So again, feel free to reach out to myself or Lou, to CPC Strategy. The phone number is at the bottom of the screen there, and you can also reach out using that email. And additionally, feel free to reach out using the hashtag CPC webinar. We are also on different social channels, Facebook, Twitter, so feel free to reach out there as well. That being said, I will ask a couple more questions. I have a great one from Mike, which is a little broad, but I think you got this one, Lou. Mike wants to know, besides raising the bid or budget for your campaign, what action items can be done using competitive insights?
Yeah, so those are obviously the two main ones that that you would consider, is whether or not to allocate more budget or raise your bids. But it can also give you an insight into perhaps whether or not your campaign is granular enough. One of the things that you might see is that you're getting a lot of impression share for a given ad group, let's say. And let's say that you sell a specific type of athletic gear, and your impression share is on par with that of, let's say, a big box retailer like a Macy's or something like that, and maybe you sell the same type of product. In that case, you might realize that your keyword match type strategy is a little bit too broad. You're probably overspending, because that impression share that you want, it's going to need to be a little bit more pared down and niche for you. So that can give you insight into, maybe my campaign is too broad, maybe I need to break up my campaign into smaller segments with more detailed and granular type of keyword targeting. And so, like I said, maximum impression share is not always the goal. It's what type of impression share do you want based on your business's needs and your business's ability and budget. But then in general, the main thing that you want to look at is you want to find campaigns that are doing well that don't have good impression share. And then that will give you insight into whether or not you need to raise your bids or budgets. But the first thing that I mentioned is I think what you were looking for, other types of action items that you might be able to take.
That's a fantastic point. More is definitely not always the better avenue for exposure on search. Kind of a local specific question from Kira. She wants to know, how important is local for your 2015 strategy? Is it something that you could possibly do without?
Well, I think, obviously, again, it's business specific, but I don't think it's something that you can do without, because one major factor is Google Maps, especially if you have a brick and mortar store, and really only if you have a brick and mortar store. Well, let me back up a step. If you do have a brick and mortar store, local advertising on AdWords and local campaigns are paramount. If you do not have a brick and mortar store, some people still opt to localize their campaigns to their local area where their actual e-commerce business does exist, because maybe they have better brand presence there. That scenario you could potentially do without, but you still, if you have a separate local budget, you want to have that. But the main thing that I talk about is, if you have brick and mortar stores in local locations, you definitely want to have a specific local campaign, because one of the main things is this whole omni-channel movement that we talk about. If you're going to be doing offline type of print advertising, or you're going to be doing email blasts, you're going to be doing advertising across multiple different channels, having that local AdWords strategy and local budget is important, because you want to be able to take advantage of, number one, specifically mobile traffic, traffic that is on foot or mobile, close to your brick and mortar store, and they're searching for your types of products. You want to make sure that you have a strong mobile bid on those specifically. You have local calls to action, local sales, local promotions for them to take advantage of, and that just allows you to have a specific targeted approach to that consumer, and keep your your omni-channel type of marketing experience strong across all your different channels, and local is going to be a big part of that. And the reason I mentioned Google Maps is because Google is doing all they can to make sure that sponsored listings are getting are getting preference on Google Maps. So a lot of people and more people are adopting Google Maps. I think it's one of the fastest growing mobile apps that people are using. I mean, it already has hundreds of millions of users, but people are doing more shopping types of queries on Google Maps, from what we understand. So if you're on your map app and you're looking for a some type of a sporting goods store or whatever it may be, having a local campaign that has mobile bids that can outrank some of your competitors' natural listings on the map, Google will show those ads there on the Google map, and you can gain some foot traffic and you drive some traffic to your store. So I think mobile is a big part of 2015.
Awesome. I know personally I spend way too much time on maps, and maybe that's just because I'm directionally inept, but you got me, so I'm a good case study there. Question from another Matthew, wants to know in terms of Q4 PPC strategy, and obviously we're just moving into that season right now, but when is a good time to actually start outlining Q4 strategy?
Okay, so the question is, when is a good time to start your Q4 strategy for 2015? Is that the question?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that the sooner the better. But one of the best things about really robust analysis of 2014 is that it's going to include Q4 2014, obviously, so you can see kind of those ebbs and flows, what exactly happened on a brand level or a product group level from Q3 to Q4. And like I talked about earlier, were your budgets in line for that? So you can go ahead and have kind of a brand-specific or product-type-specific strategy, rough strategy for 2015 Q4 as early as Q1. But of course, not only do you want to look at 2014 holistically and use that as your strategy for 2015 Q4, you also want to consider what happens throughout the year of 2015 and kind of marry that with what happened in 2014. So it's a double approach there, but to answer your question succinctly, I think that the sooner the better. As early as Q1, you can go ahead and start formulating a rough budget and a rough campaign by campaign strategy for what you want to accomplish in 2015 Q4.
Awesome, fantastic. GoToWebinar is basically kicking us out right now, so I'm going to close this out. Just want to say thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, taking the time out of your day to kind of tune in and chat with us. Some amazingly great questions today, so we appreciate that as well. And also just want to put a gentle reminder out there that if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to us via phone, email, social, and feel free to check out. We have a whole slew of resources over at cpcstrategy.com and cpcstrategy.com/blog, where you can learn about some data feed tips, Google Shopping, PPC, Q4, all that juicy, beautiful stuff. So thanks so much, guys, and we hope you have a wonderful day.